Welcome to VO Life, brought to you by Gravy for the Brain Oceania. Today, we've got a special guest here. Well, they're always special guests, aren't they? Let's be honest. As you know, we have the movers and shakers of the voice world, people who are big in the world of voiceover. And last year, I had the wonderful Peter Dixon on for a fireside chat. And I thought, well, it's only right, really, to invite his co-conspirator on, Hugh Edwards, who's, of course, CEO of Gravy for the Brain worldwide. Welcome, Hugh.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for just placing me in rank a year behind Peter. How lovely.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
I know where I'm supposed to be placed, Toby. It's fine.
Exactly. And actually, I nearly forgot, but I didn't quite. That I drank whiskey on that show, so I can toast you and get slightly drunker as the interview goes on, as we did last year. But there's probably not any whiskey in the office where you are, and
it's 9 a.m.
It's 9 a.m. So if you were drinking, it would probably be a problem. But
yes, I've got myself a nice coffee. And hello to all of the audience. Thanks for joining us.
Cool. So lots of ground to cover today in terms of we want to find out about Hugh Edwards, where you've come from, all about your kind of how you found the voiceover world and sort of what you've learned from it and what you've done within it. Covering, because you are from the bit of IMDb stalking that I've been doing, it introduced you as an actor, producer, and voice director and casting director. And the actor bit surprised me. Have you acted?
I have acted, yes.
What in?
Let me see. I've done 7 films, I think. I've been in probably a couple of 100 computer games. But that was mainly because with the computer games, I ended up, there was always a few lines that the games company missed. And so rather than just go and hire someone for it, it's like, fine, I'll just go and do it. And then those got, a little bit more and more. But I always tended to try and not cast myself because it's a tiny bit unethical, isn't it?
A little bit,
but it was,
yeah.
A little bit. But it was just when there were things that needed filling. So I just run in and do them. So lots and lots of little tiny snippets of games. A few films. Mainly low
parts.
Budget. On actual speaking parts, I've been killed a lot of ways. I've been mauled to death. I have been eaten by a werewolf. Zombie, all guts ripped out by zombies. I've been chainsawed in half. That was a really good on-screen effect, actually.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of hanging there with no torso. It's quite funny. I would imagine a lot of my enemies liked watching that.
Gosh, this is a side that I completely didn't know existed. So the challenge for everyone is to go and find these independent zombie films that star Hugh Edwards being cut up. So answers on a postcard, please.
Well, funnily enough, the very first film that I ever did was a film called Little Big Men, and it was a film as a kids' film. And the idea was you had these 4 gangsters, adult gangsters, and they stole this massive diamond and they got caught by the karma police and shrunk into kids. And the kids, the trick was with the shows that the kids retained their adult voices. So it was like one massive ADR gig. And I was one of the characters in that. And I was kind of producing that as well. And at the end of it, I mean, talk about low budget. This was really low budget. And at the end of it, we'd completely run out of money. We'd spent it all on catering, I think. And
as you do.
And I called up my friend Neil Gardner, who's an audio producer in the UK. And I said, Neil, we need a voiceover. And he said, well, there's always Dixon, and he'll sort of say anything. So I called up this chap who I didn't know called Peter Dixon. And this was in the middle of his X Factor career, 2004, I think it was, 2005. And I mean, Peter was big news. He was a household name here. And he said, yes, I'd love to do it. I said, there's no money in it. He said, no worries. And so he just came and did it. In fact, he actually paid to do it because he paid his own petrol down to the studio.
Wow.
So he came and was in this little tiny thing. And then I think a month later, I was doing a game for National Geographic. And so I gave the part to Peter as a sort of by way of thanks, And, a couple of liquid lunches after that. And that's how we became friends.
Yeah, gosh, how interesting. And thus GFTB was born, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I guess, one of those lessons in voiceover that we always bang on about, charge what you're worth, don't go do the race for the bottom. But there are occasions and sometimes it does pay off. Like if you were doing a favor for someone, or you can see it's going to go somewhere, like he kind of invested in that future. And I mean, if he hadn't done of that, then we wouldn't be talking probably.
That's true. There's always like a little tiny thing in the corner that gives you the worry. If they say it's for free, but you'll get great exposure, warning signs, because they're just trying to get you for free, right? But there are lots of occasions. I mean, like the community radio is a very soul-fulfilling type of thing, and in general, that's for free. But you get to meet nice people, and you get to have fun with it, and help out, people either in the community or local hospital radio or those sorts of things. Charity work's very, very good. Not only does it get you through the pearly gates, but it also helps you. It helps the charity because they need charitable donations, and your service is one of them. But also, you'll get invited to parties by the charity for some launch thing or whatever, and you'll be sitting next to a CEO of some company that you just couldn't have sat next to otherwise because you were involved in the project as well, and they're sponsoring it or whatever it is. These things I think are good things to do. I do see an awful. I mean, the Facebook groups of this world are simultaneously brilliant and full of horror, because you see an awful lot of people saying, don't you dare not charge for this, you charge your worth and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it works out, and sometimes if you want to do a project because it's fun, go do it.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? It's a total balance, because like you say, like I will donate my time the same way I donate my money to do certain projects like that. And like you say, it's very fulfilling, and you never know what it's going to lead to. Often doesn't lead to charity dinners for me, because it's the airfares to get there are a bit steep. Generally,
well, and you've also, I mean, you live further out than Crocodile Dundee went walkabout, right? You're right in the middle of nowhere, so I understand.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, where did it all start, the voice thing? Have you always been interested in things like voice? Have you got any formal training? Like, what was the genesis of your entry into the voice and entertainment world?
Well, so I had a kind of acting bent as a kid. I was raised by Amdram parents. I was Tiny Tim many a year in the Christmas Carol on stage and things like that. And I just loved it when I was a kid. And I was always in theatres with my parents. And in fact, the first time I ever got drunk was at an after-show party for one of theirs. But yeah, so I always had that in my youth, and I kind of kept that through my teens and then into my 20s and things like that. But I wanted to be a rock star. That's what I wanted to do, and I was a drummer. So I went to university. A drummer, I suppose. Yes, never not a drummer. Exactly. And I went to university, and I wanted to move to London and pursue my fame and fortune. And my mother, quite rightly, said, "No, you got to get a real job, otherwise you're going to end up on the streets." So I ended up working in investment banking. For 9 years. I worked for Credit Suisse, first Boston, and then Merrill Lynch. And I ended up being a relatively successful IT project manager there. And I was looking after really big budgets, big team. I think 60 was the last team size I had for this big project I was doing. But it was not what I wanted to do, and it was very sapping of all life. And the last 4 years I worked there, I shouldn't have, but they had these things. We used to call them the golden handcuffs in the city, where every Christmas they'd give you a £15,000 bonus, and then in June they'd give you a 10% pay rise, and you could never leave because you were always waiting for the next thing. Anyway, I was seeing a young lady at the time, and she said, "Look, I'm out of here. I'm going to go around the world for a year. You can come or you can stay. But if you stay, I guess we're done." And I thought, do you know what? This is like a perfect opportunity. So I went around the world with her. Before I did, though, I ended up speaking to Electronic Arts about some music, because I'd been doing music all the way through, hence the rock star dreams. And I went to bid for the second Harry Potter game to do the composition for it. And we ended up not getting it. It's a bit of a convoluted story, which I won't go too much into, but we got down to the last two. And when we got down to the last two, we were talking about money, and they said to me, well, what's your what can you do this an hour's worth of music for? And having negotiated loads of big contracts at Merrill Lynch, which gave me great stead, I suppose, for my life, said, well, what's your budget? and they said, well, we couldn't do it for anything less than 30,000. And I was like, oh my God, there's a living to be made here. So whilst going around the world, me and my best friend Jeremy, we started a company. And as soon as I got back after the year's travel, we started it up. And originally we were going to be doing music. This is 2001, I think it was. And we did so much music. We got a great contract for ITV, which is a big TV station here in the UK. And in a year, we did something like 250 commercials. It was very, very lucky, very fortunate, but it completely set us up. And then one day, this games company that we were composing for Steve Davis's World Championship Snooker, said to us, "You do dialogue, right?" And we went, "Yeah. Sure we do. Yeah. And having had a bit of training and done a bit of directing of local stuff and this, that, and the other, we got Steve Davis in and we directed him, and I absolutely loved it. At the same time as the dialogue career, sort of 2002, 2003 started to take off, I was falling out of love with music. It became like paint by numbers. Because one games company would say, okay, we want some John Williams Star Warsy type stuff. And I'd go, great. We'd go and do that. And the next one would be like, we want the Bourne Identity, big drums, bum, bum, bum. Great, we'll do that. And the next one would be, we're after a sort of John Williams, like Star Wars type thing. I went, right, okay. And the next one would be like, yeah, definitely want Bourne Identity, as close as you can get. Okay. Yeah. And it just got really tiresome. But the dialogue was allowing us to be creative and work with actors and bring life to things that at the time were being done not so well. The dialogue in games used to be a bit of a joke in the old days. It wasn't particularly good. Not all in all cases, of course. There were some really good things, but in the main, it wasn't brilliant. And so it just kind of took off, and I just did game after game after game and really loved it. And that was this kind of start of it, about getting into dialogue. Meeting Peter, as I said, 2004, 2005. Then we just became friends for a while. We set up another company called My Ready Voice, which was kind of one of the world's first TTS models, I suppose, because it was really concatenating phrases. Yeah, it would be like, Toby, happy birthday. And you could sort of download that, but it would comp things on the fly.
That's clever, right? Yeah.
And we did
phrases
birthdays,
instead of phonemes, right?
It was, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was like more like the train station version of TTS rather than what we see now. But yeah, so we did that, and it was a meteoric success until the iPhone came out, and then everyone realized that they didn't want ringtones or downloadable content for phones anymore, and it literally fell off a cliff.
Wow.
But by that point, we were getting into the training side.
Yeah, gosh, how interesting. So quite a sort of long weaving path, and it's explained so much that I didn't know about you, especially the investment banking part with the and asking about the budget and all that sort of stuff. It's so interesting that like there are all these skills that you learn on your journey, be it short or long, that you kind of that you can apply in future skills, especially like things like that you learn about. Always ask about the price first, because if you go in and say 100 quid and they say, oh, we were actually thinking 50,000, but no, yours sounds better.
Well, or even worse, this guy can't be any good if he's only charging 100 quid, because all the other quotes we've got are 3,000 or 4,000.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. So that's what
do you know though, I say to I've got children, and one of the things that in hindsight always perplexed me was why careers advisors at school never told you that your career path is an evolution. It's very, very rare that you set out to be a postman and you're always going to be a postman. Do you know what I mean? It's just your life doesn't go like that. It meanders.
Totally.
And I really wish that they would tell children that when they're in their teens, because the pressure of having to just be an architect. And know that that's what you're going to do. It must be really difficult for them.
And I think studies say these days that people have 5 or 6 careers, if not more these days. That was from a few years ago. So, I mean, there's this thing at the moment that employers are facing about how millennials just, like, if they're not happy in a job, they'll just leave it and just, like, have, 10 jobs in a year because there's always more jobs, which is, like you say. So how interesting. That's really interesting. And you've worked with some fairly big clients like after that, in terms of like getting into the casting for gaming after that point. Like, you've I was looking at your credits here. I mean, there's lots of really big stuff. The Harry Potter name comes up quite a bit. What are some of the biggest jobs that you've worked on as a games director, or casting and then directing for gaming?
Well, I mean, the biggest name one is Harry Potter, probably because that's one of the biggest name productions in the whole world, right? I got Harry Potter and my friend got Game of Thrones. You know, you win some, you lose some, right? But that one, I mean, I was by no means the biggest dialogue producer in the UK at the time. High Score, which is one of my other companies that does all the production, High Score Productions, which I wish I, in hindsight, again, had not named it that, because whenever I called anyone up, they're like, High School Productions. What's that? You know, yeah. But anyway.
It's clever, though. It's very clever.
Well, because it was originally meant to be for music, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I mean, we weren't the biggest, but we had a reputation for being very diligent and always being very responsive. And we got the Harry Potter gig on recommendation because the producer at the time was saying, okay, yeah, you can go with these guys, but you're really going to get looked after if you go with these guys. And that's what they wanted. So
client service.
So we did that. Yeah. And it was a really interesting game to work on because it was one of the, even though it's one of the biggest ones I've done, it's one of the few that was voice matching. And so it was acting within voice matching for the majority of it. The other side of it was creating characters that weren't in the films or the books and trying to create good characters that sounded like they were from the world, which was really good fun. But I've done, I mean, you've got to be a real gamer to know some of the bigger stuff I've worked on.
I was looking at Fallout 3 is a pretty big name in the gaming world.
Fallout 3, Elder Scrolls Oblivion, yeah. Lots of racing titles like MotoGP, Beijing Olympics, things like that.
Yep.
And nowadays the game
Sports Challenge.
Yeah. And there's another one, Cheggers Party Quiz, which was a funny one. You'd have to know who Cheggers is to get why that's funny. But he was a real character. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what the final score is. It's over 300, something like that, projects I've done of those. Not all of them are on IMDb, I have to say. There's a lot more on the High Score credits list. But and so, I mean, most of the games I did, we did get some big ones like that, of course, but a lot of the games were smaller as well, and there's nothing wrong with small games. Nowadays, I don't do all that many games now. I mainly do games that I've still got contacts with where they still want me to go and do things for them, because nowadays I work mainly in the film sector. And that's the area that I've kind of evolved into a little bit. But yeah, I mean, games are now kind of iterative. I mean, I do a lot of MMOs, which I've got one that I've been working on since 2017, and it's just so successful. Every other month they release a new DLC or a new mission or something like that, and then that's another 15 days of dialogue.
Yeah.
It's the game that keeps on giving.
So lots of acronyms came up then. MMOs is massively multiplayer online?
Yes.
Yeah,
the big online games that everyone joins and all plays together, yeah.
Right.
DLCs, downloadable content.
Right.
Did I say
like
anything,
extension packs, effectively. Right.
Expansion packs, yeah. But nowadays you don't have to go and buy the CD for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on games, because I had a question that I wanted to ask about the evolution of games, because I actually spent a recent time with my buddy. We agreed to set aside a day and just immerse ourselves in games, because he hadn't got into VR and I've gotten the VR rig and definitely got into VR, and I hadn't got into any PlayStation titles or anything like that. And he was like, you have to come and play The Last of Us or something to totally get it. And I was amazed.
I mean, that's my favorite game of all time.
Totally. And it is one of those seminal games that people just hold up as this is the way it's meant to be done. And I played the Last of Us 2. And I was just amazed.
Don't give me any spoilers, because it's still in cellophane for me.
Oh, nice. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I was amazed at how much like movies games are now. Basically, there's this crossover where you're actually watching a movie, but you get to, sometimes you're on rails, sometimes you've got a bit more agency about what's going on in the world, but it does feel like a movie. It's just being rendered in real time. I mean, The Last of Us, when I was with my ex-partner, we played The Last of Us together, and within the first 15 minutes she was crying. I mean, that's the emotional hook that game has. It's really quite special. But I mean, there are so many games
like the Modern Combats,
Modern Warfare,
Call of Duty, Modern Warfare. My friend Kirsty Gilmore has just worked on that.
Oh, she has. She's done very well with that. And
yeah. In fact, I think we've just booked her for One Voice UK for this year.
Oh, fantastic!
To come and talk about games and experiences in that, because she's doing really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, and on that note, I've because again, I've been kind of researching because I'm fascinated by the game genre, because I've worked in it a little bit as a voice artist, and I'd like to do it more, which involves research. You've got to find out what kind of games there are, what kind you like, sure. And YouTube is such a fantastic resource because it lets you don't have to actually go out, buy a console, buy the game, and then spend 16 hours playing the game. You can literally just watch someone else play it, and it's just about as enjoyable, if not more enjoyable, because you've got all this amazing cutscenes.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit there, but yeah, I mean, funny, what you're about to say is the opening to our gaming course is going. Go and start researching the playthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I just wanted to take a look, because it was actually because Kirsty posted about this and said, I've just been involved with this project. And I was like, I've heard about this. I want to go see what it is. I started watching, I think the previous one, Call of Duty 2, Modern Warfare. Yeah. Oh, that's the current one. I forget.
Or Black Ops or something or other. Yeah, there's loads of money.
But and I just couldn't stop watching. It was like addictive, like, because they got the scene length just right, and they got all of the clever hooks in, the action beats just at the right point, and like, so they choreographed so much like an action movie that it's crazy. And the storylines are so good, and I'm fascinated just how much like movies they are. I mean, gaming outpaces movie in terms of revenue hugely now, doesn't it? It overtook long ago.
It does now. Yeah. Especially since on-demand TV has become so popular, the movies have gone down as well. So the relative balance between games has gone up. But it massively changed when they started paying attention to the storylines and the story arcs and actually hiring proper writers in to do these games.
Well, I suppose it was always actors, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was always actors, yeah. I mean, in the very early days, sometimes you had like the art director or whoever writing the script, and you could do your best, but at the end of the day, the story arc was what it was. It's been an evolution of all sides of the game development world. It really has, from the education all the way up to the top of people understanding that they need to put more investment into to the production of these, and that it does matter that you have a story writer there from the beginning, and that the scene directors are there from the beginning, and the voice directors there from the beginning and stuff. So it's the whole thing has evolved hugely. Ironically, my favorite games that I'm playing at the moment are racing games, which don't have much dialogue in.
No, not really.
I wonder if that says something about me. I don't know.
And just quickly on the VR thing, and I know you're on there because we're friends on Facebook, and I've got an Oculus Quest too. It shows me that you're not online, which means you are part of the system, but you're not online at the time. But I've been playing Half-Life Alyx, which is like an incredible VR game and has some pretty good voice acting in it too, but a great storyline as well. But amazing world building going on. The only problem I have with sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, this is one of the downsides to the walkthroughs, is that there is something addictive. If you haven't played games, there's something addictive about playing them, getting killed, getting up and getting past that person. And then, especially if you've got a headset on, it's a different experience than watching it on YouTube altogether. Yeah,
there's actually no way to talk about or experience what VR is like without actually doing it yourself, is my experience.
Yeah. It's like diving. You have to do it to understand it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. So where gaming and voiceover overlaps, which is, quite a lot of it, because it's everything else pretty much is, the story's written and everything's generated in the computer, and then the soundtrack and the voiceover obviously have to be made by real people. And like, I've been really surprised in getting into the gaming stuff that gaming voice work isn't better paid, because it requires incredible talent and commitment. So what do you have to say about like relative rates for things like gaming? Because I mean, even the SAG, rates in the States are much less than the commercial rates, and even the corporate rates, industrial rates. So how do you explain the fact that there's a bit of difference?
Well, firstly, there is a historical precedent set for rates in gaming. And like most industry, I mean, at the moment, we're trying to argue the ILR rates in the UK, which are historically set incredibly low, just because of the way that they evolved in the beginning, which doesn't apply to now. That's one reason. And so budgets are built based on those kind of historical precedents.
Mm.
The second reason is that there is a just like films, Gary Oldman is going to get 20 million. And the guy who comes on for the one scene with one line, who's spent just as much money in acting training or whatever, is not going to get 20 million. He's going to be on a very, very different pay scale. So, if you go and try and book Troy Baker, you're going to pay an awful lot more than if you book a relative unknown from an agency. It's the way it is. It's supply and demand. So games are also based on that because they want certain styles, or some do. I mean, some games just will have unknowns in them, but very often, I mean, I did a game with Stephen Fry, for example, and I won't tell you what his budget was, but it was a large part of the dialogue, the vast constituent part of the dialogue budget. And that was done with budget from the marketing side because they know they can market the game because it's got Stephen Fry in it,
Yeah.
So it's a culmination of all of those things. And then at the same time, you also have to understand that a lot of games companies are successful, and if you look at Naughty Dog or Rockstar, they're big successful companies. But you look at someone like Rovio, who did Angry Birds, who are massively successful. When Angry Birds was successful, it was their 52nd game, and the 51 before it lost money. And these guys were second mortgaging their houses to be able to do that. So it's not always the case. I mean, if you go down to the Develop conference in Brighton, or the business side of E3, or Game Connection in Paris, or any of these industry conferences that happen, you'll find the big cheeses in one corner on a small table, and then the rest of the conference full of indie developers all doing games. And they're all set the same kind of way. So, the bigger games tend to have slightly bigger budgets, and you can negotiate your way up there. The smaller games, in general, don't have that much budget to actually play with in the first place.
It's a bit of a punt. It's a bit of a risk from their perspective.
Right, yeah. And this is also a commercial enterprise. This isn't the BBC. These are solo business people, sometimes solo, sometimes two or three of them, raising finance for friends and family, and they're the ones taking all the risk. You get to go in and do your job and then walk away. So whilst I absolutely understand that there is a question mark sometimes over the rates on gaming, I think it's also fair to say that games are absolutely symbiotic. If the art doesn't work, it's going to be crap, even if the dialogue's great. If the dialogue's crap, it's going to be a rubbish game if the physics engine doesn't work properly. All of these things combine, and everyone is paid a wage to go and do what they do to make the end product. So just because the person is an actor does not mean that their input is better than the guy who wrote the physics engine. And I think that's the one thing that the world didn't really get when SAG came about, that the games company said, I'm sorry, this is just a totally collaborative process. And, if we put you as an actor on royalty, we would have to put the physics engine guy on royalty because they're just as important. So it's not the same thing as films and TV. I don't know if that answers your question. There's probably just as many arguments against that as there are. So
it's very useful to always look behind and figure out why it is the case. And as you say, it does make a lot of sense that it's arrived at that, and different sort of genres seem to have different paths to a rate. And, usually commercial, the reason that the top rates in commercial are so big is because those companies will leverage that voiceover and make millions off it. Like off that one ad, it has to be right. And you have to have that magic that they're looking for, which is...
Well, I'm not going to name the name of the person, but for those of you guys who are watching this who don't know, the reason that Toby and I know each other is because Toby cleaned up at the One Voice Awards. I think it was 2018 and 2019 And we just said, right, well, this is the guy we've got to make work for us in Oceania. Hence, we've kind of tied you down to that, which has been lovely and a pleasure. But you have a very specific skill when it comes to doing commercials. And that's what people pay for. That's why you get those ads for BMW and whatever. And I remember hiring you to go and help coach a friend of mine who was auditioning for one of those types of things, to say, look, if you want to do it, here's the guy who's going to show you how to do it, because he's outstanding at it. So those commercial things, you really do get what you pay for. Sometimes, again, they pay for big names. Others, they don't. I've always had a bit of a bugbear that things like Kung Fu Panda out of Pixar or Disney or wherever they came from were always marketed on the fact that Jack Black was the voice, when in actual fact, if you go back just a decade and have a look at what Disney were doing, the names in things like Aladdin were all unknown, but they were way better voice actors, way better voice actors. And then you just got this thing where it's just like, okay, this stars in this one, whoever it is, Gwyneth Paltrow is blah, 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 with a Pixar animation designed around her. Great. It sells a bit, but it's not particularly brilliant voice acting,
They've done a little bit of original stuff recently, like Moana and stuff.
It's getting better. Yeah. I have to say.
Yeah. It's getting more sort of diversified, especially, which is good. Cool. So, wow, games and fees and everything. Thanks for going down that little path with me.
That rabbit hole.
that rabbit hole, absolutely. So, and one of the other big things you're known for, and one of the big things on your who you've worked for sheet is a big question mark around 2014, and a massive client who you're under NDA for helping them develop TTS. Are you still under NDA for that?
Yeah. And I was speaking to someone on a webinar live the other day who used to work for that company. I said, but I can't talk to it. And he said, oh, wasn't it blah, blah, blah? And I was like, right. So
it's a big company.
To edit that out.
It's a big company.
It's one of the top 5 big companies in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were brought in.
2012 was the first one.
Oh, right.
The first. Yes, I did for them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were brought in this thing that's called TTS, which has suddenly kind of enveloped us, and was total. It's amazing to go back to 2012 and places like that and thinking that this was your computer speaking to you and speaking in a very natural and believable way. Was, when we thought of computer-generated voices, we thought of Stephen Hawking. And it was very clear that it was being made up by a computer. But fast forward to now, and it's part of that tapestry of our lives. Our computers talk to us all the time about everything. At the start of the Zoom call, the lady informed us that this was being recorded. And so it's
although
just
that was
everywhere.
Playback, to be fair.
Well, that's true. That is true. and just bad speech synthesis as well. So take us back to that beginning of TTS and how you got involved in this large project.
Well, we've segued quite nicely onto it through gaming. I very nearly said the company name then. The company in question, I have to be careful. They clocked onto the fact really early that they couldn't go to just normal voice agents and normal casting directors, especially people who did commercials or TV, because they had no experience directing long form whatsoever. The only sector that had experience casting, going through huge voice casting things and then doing long form direction weeks and weeks at a time were the game people. So although I'm not supposed to know, I happen to know that 3 of us who worked for this company, 3 separate companies, were all in the game dev world. And so we were the experts by de facto, by default, because we were the ones doing that kind of work. Although it was quite new for us at the time. So we just went through massive casting thing. And when I say big, I mean, we're talking a couple of thousand people down to one voice. And it wasn't, in those days, there weren't the big pay to plays where you'd say, okay, 1,000 voices, please. And they'd go, sure, bing, or click, here they are. It just didn't work like that. We were having to go around all of the agents. We were having to be very creative where we found people, especially I've done 40, I think it's 48 for them, 48 different TTS models now. And especially the majority of those were not English UK. So, I've traveled very well from that job, but going to places like, Russia and Slovenia and Thailand, and I can't even remember the ones I've done for them. And trying to find that many people in those territories where they don't have voice agents, was a really difficult casting gig. But we had experience doing it, so we were creative, and we found the right people. And so I'm not entirely sure what I can, and I've got to be a little bit careful, but 2012 was the first one we did. And in those days, it was concatenative. So as we were talking about earlier on, when you mentioned phonemes, the analogy for people who are watching is, as we were saying, Toby, one phrase, happy birthday, second phrase. Whatever. So that's concatenating two phrases, gluing them together. And what the first evolutions of this would do is they would chop them into phonemes, which are the very smallest parts of dialogue. In actual fact, they were, if you want to be technical about it, they were demiphonemes, because it crossed the middle of a phoneme to the next one, because it made them easier to glue. But because of that, we would have to record massive amounts of dialogue. So the first one I ever did was 6 months recording, and it was 5 days a week, 4 hours a day for 6 months.
Wow.
No stop.
And including
just
slicing up
coverage.
all the phonemes. Like, was this actually saving it into like WAV files and then like uploading?
So we created WAV files. They built the tech to go and do all the chopping and whatever.
Right.
But it was very, very specific. And this is why at the time you had to say everything in the exact same prosody pattern, because you stood much more of a chance of lining everything up and making it not sound buggy. The bugs are the bits that sound like where you get a little jump between a pitch shift, and it sounds a little bit like it's burbling. So that was how it originally worked. And we just did loads of them, and this is alongside all the other things we were doing, like, gaming and this, that, and the other. And Grave of the Brain, of course, it was a very, very busy part of my life, and having children as well.
Yeah, true. It sounds very busy.
Yes, all of them. So that's how we got into it. It evolved massively and very, very quickly into algorithmic, and then a different, almost like a kind of computer synthesis version of. And then it got into the Tokatron models, and then it's evolved since that as well. So it's been a really interesting thing to do, but what it has done is it's given me a behind the scenes insight into not just text to speech, and which is the old way of saying it's AI voices now, which I disagree with a little bit, because AI is very far from AI. It is not artificially intelligent at all. It's just an algorithm. But it is what it is. And because of that, I've got a lot of knowledge about how the whole industry works, how the whole sector works, and also about the casting process. When you're shortlisted down of those massive castings down to the very final one, they really want you. They really, really want you. So you have much more leverage than you think. And in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who was negotiating a game recently, they'd spent 3 or 4 months trying to find this one character. And I said to her, look, if they're offering you the contract now, you've got so much more leverage. Go for double. And she did, and she got it. So it's something to bear in mind.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, like, it's been a big part of the conversations that have happened in the voice world for the last 2 years, because that's where it's really, it felt like about 2 years ago, it suddenly became mainstream. And lots of small companies picked up the Tokatron 2 model, and they put their own, front ends on it, and everyone started, saying this is going to replace voices. So there were a bunch of different sort of assaults on voiceover, not only that like our work could be replaced, but we could be hired to do the work and then not receive any kind of royalty. Like our voices could be used for anything, which is, in a few cases, especially the Bev Standing case, which was kind of a landmark case from last year, that was proven to be kind of true. What do you think the biggest challenges are where we are now? Because we know a lot more about how these models are. There's a lot more knowledge about the fact that, your voice can be kind of like quote unquote stolen. What do you think that some of the challenges are where it stands?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. So in the UK, we have a union called Equity, and Equity are currently fighting a law that's trying to be passed through Parliament at the minute, which is saying that the AI companies can freely data mine anything that's out there. So, for example, they could go and data mine any clips of you on YouTube and go and build a model from that.
Wow.
And you have no recourse for it. You can't stop them doing it. So clearly that's trying to be fought. That's one challenge.
Who came up with that, Bill, and on what basis? Like, because I heard about this and I thought it must be not true because it's like clearly ridiculous. But
but it's been there for a long time. The original law has been there, even in EU law, to be able to assist AI companies in getting started, but not to be able to use your likeness or use your voice or whatever. And the new iteration of the law is so wide open that it would allow all those sorts of things, even though it doesn't explicitly say it. So they're trying to get the law tightened back down again.
That is concerning, isn't it? Good Lord.
It's very concerning, yeah. So that's one kind of concern. Then there are... it's fair to say that it is a very chaotic market right now. And in chaotic markets, there is lots of opportunity. From both sides. So that can be seen as a positive, but it also can be seen as a worry. And the Bev Standing case is a good example of that. Now, for anybody who's not clued up on TTS, who's interested, or AI voices, go and have a look at the blog on Grave for the Brain that I put on there. It's about as comprehensive, going through all of the different aspects of TTS and the pitfalls currently that we all know about, and what to look out for certain jobs, because there are lots of different types of jobs. There are training jobs, there are voice jobs, there are model-based jobs. So yeah, it's worth reading that blog so that you can get your head around it.
Yeah, I might go do that, because I've always been a bit unclear about, what the difference is. They say it's just being used to train an AI, your voice won't be used, and you're like, yeah, but if it's training on my voice, it's probably going to sound a bit like me, So I'm sure you explain that in the article, but I'll
well, yeah, just to get onto that. So, I mean, you have a pitch pattern, a prosody pattern. So I can extract. It's called the F curve. I can extract that frequency curve, the frequency of your voice, and use that as a map to train a model without using your actual sound. Yeah, in exactly the same way as auto-tuners do. They work out what your pitch curve is, and then they adjust that. Right. So this is not adjusting it. This is taking that as a template and putting it on. So it's still not using your actual voice.
But it does sound a lot like, it's the prosody that is associated with my my performance, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of, lots of actors that are caricatured, Stallone or someone, Stallone has that kind of type of thing. You put that onto a model, it's going to end up sounding a bit like Stallone, isn't it? Even if it's an impersonator. So it's a very unclear legal market at the moment. What is clear is that Pandora's box will never be shut again. Unless some EMP pulse kills all the world's electronics, it's here to stay, right? And it's going to carry on. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity in that chaos. Gaming is a great example where once you create a TTS model, it sounds like that model. If you're really, really sad and unhappy, the model will come out like that. And so you can build character models, which is what they want for games. Once you've built one, it sounds like that character, and it will only perform like that character. So they're not going to go and put it in a different game. They might put it in the second iteration, but they're not going to put it in a different one. So it's only going to be used for that game. So that's a really good example of where an AI model can be really useful, where you're paid to go and create the model and then whatever usage, but then they can use that in an online way to just generate content all the time in the same sense.
It's one of the best uses of AI that I've heard is dynamic content within multiplayer games or just all video games, so that you can have you've got chatbots that come up with the original text, and it's just the next logical step of that to have a voice that reads it, and you'd never get an actor to read 1 billion pages of script so that you have every possible word combination. So it does seem like the next logical step, and I like the idea that can be tied up to that character. So as long as it's the company that owns it, and you're kind of either reimbursed very well to start off with for your performance, or there's some kind of royalty, then it sounds like everyone could be happy. Like I say, opportunity.
There are a couple of other good models. The evergreen version of yourself is also a good model, where you create yourself and then you use your model to fulfill long form or whatever it is you want to do. The only downside to that one is that the marketplace doesn't exist properly for that yet. We're all waiting for it to happen. I suspect it's only really going to come in and then take off one once blockchain and NFTs manage to sort out watermarking and trackability of audio, because then you actually can track it and you don't have to worry about the fact that your voice ends up on a sex doll or a porn site or whatever it is. Which is happening, with some TTS models.
And Voice 123 sounds like they're kind of dipping their toe into that arena as one of the big players. They're getting heavily into AI voice and making their own models of their voices. So that's kind of an interesting development.
So there's that. The other one, I did a webinar the other day with a company called Altered AI, and they have a really interesting one where they're doing speech to speech, which is different to text to speech.
Yeah, I saw their demo.
Speech to speech. Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Speech to speech is basically where you act out with a different person's voice. So it's analogous to motion capture, where you're putting on a suit and then the end result has a different skin of, a different person or a gorilla or whatever it may be. This is you putting on a different voice. So, for example, I could act and have the voice be a child's voice, or an 80-year-old female's voice, but I'm actually acting that voice out. So that's another really interesting. I mean, again, that opens huge moral and ethical dilemmas of how you charge it on performance based on usage, and it's a very unknown area yet, but it's very exciting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, especially in sort of gaming, like you say. But the top games guys will just do every voice and just pitch shift into different roles.
Well, I mean, there's for the last few years, there's been a very interesting debate going on, mainly at the voice conferences, about diversity and about who should be doing certain jobs, and whether a white person should be doing a black person's job, and whether someone from Samoa should be doing a French person's job, and this, that, and the other. And it's interesting because traditionally, especially with gaming, the idea is that you have as much ability as possible, so that you can go and do your main character and then go and do the French guy and then go and do the German guy and then do the wizard and this, that, and the other. And I mean, I'm not really sure where that debate ended, if it even has ended, and it's an important debate to be having. But what is interesting about this is that speech to speech is going to blow all that out of the water. Because you've then got the performance of someone doing it, and are they doing it authentically, and so on and so forth. And if they are, why bother using speech to speech in the first place? And do you know what I mean? It's a really interesting debate to have.
How do you cast someone who's like by their voice, whose voice is going to be radically altered?
Right, yeah. I mean, Andy Serkis has got away with it yet because there aren't any Golems or King Kongs. So he's been all right.
Yeah.
But at some point,
monsters, you're fine. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah. Very, very cool. So, and like we say, gaming, big, TTS has been big in your sort of career. I was going to ask quickly about like tips for people who want to either get into TTS or direct TTS sessions, or whatever. I guess that's quite a niche sort of a thing. But like, what's the important thing to remember when someone is voicing for TTS or trying to get TTS voice down? Is it consistency, or is it now more authenticity, would you say?
That's a really difficult question. I don't know. Well, okay. Let me go back to the stuff that I was casting. We had a specific word, and I can't tell you what the word is because it would tell you who the company is. But it was kind of like sort of TTS-ish, right? So we would ask ourselves, okay, do they sound in the right kind of age bracket? Yes. Do they sound, are they consistent? Yes. Am I going to be able to work with them for that longer period? Yes. And that was just as big a consideration as well. Have they got good enough experience? Yes. And then the last one was, do they sound TTS-ish? And that one thing was the thing that got rid of 90% of the people who we were casting in the end. And I cannot give you a written or a verbal, this is what you have to do to be a TTS voice, because anyone could do it. but to actually get the voice that everyone seems to want and like and hear, that isn't aggravating, that sounds right, that's warm in certain deliveries with certain text, that's not too cold in other ones, that can say that, I don't know, there was a Holocaust and 1 million Jews were killed, and that can also say that you've had a package delivered, and it still all work and still make sense and still be fluid. And it's a really, really difficult thing. The only advice I can really say is be yourself, I guess. Maybe ever so slightly more positive than neutral as a voice. So not big jazz hands, but not unhappy, so that you're sounding warm and confident.
Like
confidence is another thing that's massively.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Cool.
Funnily enough, I would say if I were to give it a percentage, there were some people who were relatively inexperienced out of the 48 that I cast, but I would say 95% of them had been pros for a long time because they knew how to really control their voice. So yeah, experience counts for a lot as well.
Cool. Very nice. All right, pivoting to Gravy for the Brain. We've got to talk about the name, because everyone asks, and I do know the story, and people ask me and I say, I can't remember the story. It must not be that interesting. Am I correct?
Okay. Well, no, it is quite interesting. So this, it's a bit of a clang, I'm afraid. It's a family friend of my mother's, actually, a chap called Patrick Stewart. He's an actor who did a film.
Patrick Stewart.
That one, yeah. Who did a film, and it was called Conspiracy Theory. And there's a bit where he jabs Mel Gibson in the neck with some truth serum, I think it is. And Mel's freaking out.
That should work on Mel Gibson.
That should work on the voice actors. Yeah, no. He jabs it in there, and Mel's freaking out, and he says, "What is it?" And Patrick says, "It's gravy. It's gravy for the brain." And I thought, oh, what a lovely phrase. And we were looking, when Peter and I were setting up, trying to incorporate the company, for not only something that had a URL available, but also something that meant something. That meant something to what we were trying to do. And actually, originally, a lot of people don't know this, is that Gravy for the Brain was not set up just to do voice. It was set up more as a sort of Udemy type thing to do different types of courses. And in the very early years, we also recorded things like an art of service course. We did a drumming course. We did public speaking course. We did lots of weird, different types of courses. But it turns out that better what you know is what you're good at, and me and Peter were good at voice, and so we kept focusing on it, and that's where we got all the traction. So we ended up getting rid of everything else, but Gravy for the Brain meant food for thought, right? And so that's what it kind of originally came from. But it had a bonus and it had a negative. The bonus was that everyone remembered it, and secondly, that it didn't have the word voice in it, funnily enough. Because if you look at every single other company in our sector, they've all got the word voice in it somewhere. And it means that SEO is really hard. Whereas for us, it wasn't. The negative, of course, is that you have to tell people what on earth it is. And so our marketing budget has been a little bit higher.
We need to take that phrase from the movie and somehow get rights to use it. Can you use videos less than 10 seconds long or something? We just need to put that at the front of all of our videos.
Maybe, yeah. I'll ask Patrick.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was his suggestion anyway.
Oh, nice. Well, no, next time you're seeing him for a beer or something.
I haven't seen him in years.
True. So that does explain it. I can remember that. I'm going to go away and look up this scene.
It's a great film. You should watch it. It's Mel Gibson, Patrick Stewart, and Julia Roberts.
Right, big fan of Patrick Stewart though. I think he's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we've kind of covered, coming up to Christmas, past, present, and future. We've covered the past. We've covered the present a little bit. I just want to end the present with like what some of the big moments have been this year for like the voice world and for you sort of personally in the voice realm. Not the voice realm, the site, but
don't mention that one. For me personally, I've really enjoyed working on feature films in the last few years and this year as well. I've literally just finished working on the fourth Expendables film with Stallone and Statham and Megan Fox, which will be out early next year, I think. And I've done quite a few other films. The highlight for me working with Martin Campbell, who's a director who did Casino Royale and GoldenEye and things like that. And I worked on a couple of films with him, one called Memory with Liam Neeson and Guy, Australian actor, his name?
Yes.
Guy Pearce, yes. And another one called The Protege with Michael Keaton and Sam Jackson, which was great fun. So yeah, those are really, really. It's been an evolution where I've sort of graduated into the Hollywood films, which has been really, really good fun. And it's also good for my CV and just massively fun to work on. You know,
great parties, I bet.
Yeah, yeah, they are. They really are. And the so and the premieres are fun too. So
is that in the capacity of like ADR direction, or like what sort of, how do you interface with the film?
Yeah, ADR with the principals and the secondaries, and then looping and doing the background looping tracks as well.
Right. Yeah. So is that ADR? Now, there's been contention because I've always taught it that there's a bunch of different ways. It's either additional dialogue replacement or automated dialogue replacement, or something else. Which one of those?
It all means the same thing nowadays. It was all historically based on the method that you use to do it. Nowadays, it's all done on computers and Q voice and things like that. So, yeah, it's all just looping basically, crowds and those sorts of things. The ADR stuff with the principal and the secondary characters, principal being the main actors, secondaries being the ones that are either off screen or are put on for some other reason. That's a skill in itself, because you have lip sync to do, and or you're replacing dialogue and replacing performance, and sometimes it doesn't look right, and people forget about breathing, and the only downside to it for me is that unfortunately it's one of those things that you have to be so analytical that it's kind of ruined films for me and TV shows. And now I can just hear ADR straight away.
Same.
It's just like, well, they've done this whole scene. Apart from that guy, that's weird. Why would they not do that? You know, and while I'm watching it at the cinema, whereas I was oblivious to it before, like the vast majority of the world is.
So I always hear that slight shift in tone, just like when I'm listening to audiobooks, and midway through a sentence, I'll be like, oh, that's a different recording day. Because something changes, like the mic position changes, and their position changes, and everything changes, and I'm just like, oh wow, that was different.
Yeah, you have to have different ears, don't you, for this caper?
Yeah.
So for me, that's probably the best thing. I also really enjoyed working on an animation this year called Jolt, which is just out at the film festivals now. That was great fun. And then. Seeing Gravy grow, we're just about to release Grave for the Brain Africa with Emeka, which is going to be great fun. So I'm really pleased about that. And I have to say, One Voice Conference USA was a real highlight for me this year, because we couldn't go last year. And it was the first one that I went to. Last year was just insane because the US wouldn't let anyone into the country. So we had to send Harry to Mexico for 2 weeks to then go and run the conference for us remotely. It was hell. So it was really good fun this year to go out there and see everyone and interact with everyone. It was great fun. For the voice world, the thing I'm most excited about really is speech to speech. I've been involved with that company sort of behind the scenes, and it's just got so much positive potential for the voice industry. I get sometimes like people are a bit freaked out by AI voices, especially because of the profligacy and the pace that it's going. No one knows where it's going to end up. Personally, I love that kind of chaos because, as I say, there's opportunity there. But the speech to speech one is something you can really grab onto, and it's actors performing, and it's designed to do exactly that. So I think that's going to be great.
Absolutely. And like you say, that's such an interesting counterpoint to the very strong movement into the world of like and everyone I've talked to in VO Life the last couple of years, I've asked them about the changes that have happened in the industry in terms of diversity and in terms of like representation on screen and that kind of thing, and how that there have been historical wrongs where the wrong people were hired to perform something, and this does throw this really strange shape spanner in the works in terms of like it's now just about performance, and you just hire a performance. It doesn't actually matter what you sound like. Which is it's almost like a counterpoint to the pull of that to one way and to the other way. So yeah, I found it very interesting.
I would say on that note, just as a quick tip for everybody out there, with your voice contracts, and hands up everybody who is using a voice contract in every job they do, because I asked that at a conference the other day, and 2 people out of 100 put their hands up. So firstly, make sure you are. But in those voice contracts, you should be saying for every type of job you have now that your voice may not be used for any inclusion in future TTS or speech-to-speech or any synthetic voice models whatsoever in the history of the future without my consent. Because theoretically, if you've done an audiobook for someone in the past and you haven't got that, they can then just go and create a model from it because they own the rights to that one.
Yeah,
so
they've got the text, they've got the voice.
They've got the text, they've got the speech.
Yeah, they could do a great model with that, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
4-hour.
So just start putting it in your contracts.
That's a good idea.
It's something you need to do.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Absolutely. Is it better to be a voice artist today or 20 years ago?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I thought that was a good question.
No. You said yes or no, but you asked me is it then or now.
That's true, then or now. Yeah.
I think it's just different. You know, I mean, everything's a bit rose tinted, isn't it? You know, I mean, I remember sort of thinking when I was younger, God, I wish I was sort of born in the 60s so that I would have been around in the 70s, and then I would have been a rock star. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's just like too flooded now, and all this crap that you come out with when you're in your teens and you're failing. So, yeah, I mean, okay, it was good 20 years ago, but again, you had to be brilliant, and it was difficult because you were driving all the way around the country, you know, to radio stations everywhere. So you didn't get to see your family as much. There wasn't anywhere near as much voice work in the market. So yes, there wasn't as many voice artists. Yeah, there weren't P2P sites, but there's so much more. The rates were higher.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I mean, I still know people who are 6-7 figure earners now, you know, and that's not a lie. That's true.
Yeah.
So you just got to be good at it.
Yeah.
And those the same thing still applies.
Those 6 or 7 earners can now rock up to their home studio in their pajamas and like work for about a quarter of the time that they would have had to before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you could be in your pants now and we wouldn't even know.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll leave you to just stew on that one for a bit, and the fact that it's just amazing how the walls have fallen down around where you have to be, like geographically. I'm in the middle of the New Zealand jungle, and like I still do all this work, and yeah, I love that about that. It has democratized in a bunch of ways the industry these days.
Absolutely. I mean, there aren't all that many positives from the pandemic. But one positive for our industry is that it has exactly done that. It's taught, or it's forced companies to understand that it's okay and that we've invested and we sound good at home, and that you don't need to go and pay a studio. And on that note, charge studio fees, people, because very few people are.
It's like, well, yeah, it's one of those things now that you
put it on a line item in an invoice and say, here's the £200 for my voice, here's the £50 usage, and here's the 3 hours, £50 studio that I did. And they'll go, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what they'll do.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, true. Unless you've gone for one of those auditions that said, client will use complimentary studio.
Yeah, who does that? Who writes client will give me their studio for free on an audition?
Cool. Well, I have covered, I think, just about everything on my list. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to talk about?
Well, look at that nice little row of One Voice awards. I've just realised you've got them all behind you.
That one, yes. above the whiskey.
Poor old Toby. When Toby started working for us, he wasn't then allowed to enter into the One Voice Awards anymore.
It's such a shame.
Which is a real shame.
I even checked the terms and conditions for the Vox Awards the other day, but damn, I can't do that either.
Sorry, mate. No, it wouldn't be cool, would it? But no, thank you very much for having me on. It's lovely to be on Oceania for once.
Yeah, absolutely. What's planned for Christmas? It's coming up very soon, sooner than I thought it was.
Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it? So Christmas is going to be a very small affair. My children are Christmas Eving with their mother for Christmas Eve, and then I've got them Christmas Day.
Nice.
I think Gareth, our programmer, is going to come over for some lunch.
Oh, cool.
And it's going to be a very intimate, small, sober affair.
Yeah, those can be the best. They really can. Yeah, especially in the winter over there. I kind of miss a British winter Christmas because
it's very cold here.
Over here,
it's -6 here today.
Really? Jeez, yeah. No, it's it got up to about 30 here today. So yeah, for some comparison.
Lucky goose.
So we might go to the beach on Christmas Day, I think. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing you all over there in May for the One Voice conference and One Voice Awards.
You gonna come?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've already booked my tickets, so I am there.
Good man.
Yeah, but we'll talk more about that closer to the time.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for coming on. It's been great.
Take care, everyone.